Well, a very warm welcome to you if you're here for the very first time, and an especially warm welcome to you if you happen to be a friend or a relative of one of the people who are going to be baptizing in about 15 minutes from now. You're very welcome. My name is Adrian, and I thought I'd begin this short talk, if I may, just by telling you a story. When my wife Julia and I were first married, well, I've actually got a photo of this coming out. Here we are. When my wife Julia and I were first married, this was our kitchen. And you can't really see it in the picture, but the ceiling sloped down so that I wasn't actually able to stand up completely in front of the cooker. I had to kind of bend over slightly in front of the cooker. And so on one occasion, one morning, as I just lit the gas hob, the stove, the flame was there, I smelt burning. And that was a really odd thing to smell because I hadn't actually done anything. I hadn't put a saucepan on the hob. So I was thinking, what could possibly be burning? And then I looked down and I saw that the tassels at the end of my dressing gown were both on fire. And so what would have been perhaps the obvious thing to do would have been perhaps to take off my dressing gown. But I was just so shocked to find that I was on fire that what I did was I just called out to my wife upstairs, "I'm on fire! I'm on fire!" And she came downstairs and put out the fire. The reason why I did nothing, even though I was on fire, was because being on fire was just so different from what I was expecting. In the same way, I never expected to be involved in church. My plan for my life did not involve Christianity or church. Then I discovered compelling evidence for the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And a bit like being on fire, something had happened that was so unusual, I had to do something about it. So, when I was not a Christian, it was historical evidence that persuaded me that Jesus must have risen physically from the dead. Jesus made amazing claims. Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. He claimed to be able to forgive sins. He claimed that one day he would judge everyone who's ever lived on a judgment day. And he said that he'd show that his amazing claims are true by rising physically from the dead. So if Jesus really did rise from the dead, that's massive. But hey, did it really happen? Well, if you look at every book, every research paper, every article that historians have written about the resurrection, it's possible to work out which, if any, facts they agree upon. In other words, if you read everything that every scholar has ever written on the subject, you could find out any facts that the overwhelming majority of academics, both Christian and non-Christian, consider reliable. And so using this restrained or cautious approach, let's look briefly now at just 3 minimal facts that historians have agreed upon. These are facts which are accepted even by atheists, even by those scholars who oppose the resurrection. Minimal fact number 1, Jesus was crucified and died as a result. John Dominic Crossan has spent most of his life trying to debunk historic Christianity, but even Crossan admits that Jesus was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. James D. Tabor, another high-profile attacker of Christianity, agrees. Tabor says, "We need have no doubt that given Jesus' execution by Roman crucifixion, Jesus was truly dead. More importantly, our ancient non-Christian sources, Tacitus, Josephus, the Jewish Babylonian Talmud, and Lucian of Samosata, all say that Jesus was crucified. And we have 4 early documents, the so-called Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They also report Jesus' death on the cross. And there are lots of other reasons why modern skeptics are so sure that Jesus died by crucifixion. For starters, these Roman soldiers were a professional crucifixion team. They were experts at executing people. If a prisoner escaped death, the responsible soldiers might be put to death themselves. So they had a huge incentive to make absolutely sure that Jesus was dead before they removed his body from the cross. The Gospels report that they thrust a spear into his side to make sure he was dead. We now know that the separated water and blood which flowed out of the spear wound is good medical evidence that Jesus was dead. But could Jesus possibly have survived crucifixion? Maybe Jesus survived crucifixion, and then in the cool air of the tomb, he might have recovered enough strength to roll away the stone and overpower the guards and then appear to his disciples. In my book, Aftershock, I wrote, "The idea that Jesus never died on the cross asks us to believe that a man could survive a Roman flogging, a crucifixion, and a spear through his heart, then unwrap himself from yards of cloth, push away a huge stone, fight his way past guards, and then appear to his disciples as the picture of health, convincing them that one day they could have a glorious resurrection body just like his." I don't think it's surprising that the survival theory has never really got off the ground. Minimal fact number 2. Jesus' tomb was empty. Now, even an atheist historian will tell you that on the third day, the tomb was empty. 3 days after Jesus' dead body was buried, it simply wasn't there. Why are atheists willing to admit that the tomb was empty? Answer, because historians agree that if Jesus' dead body had been in the tomb, then the Jews or the Romans would have produced it as soon as the first Christians started claiming, Jesus is alive. Remember, Jesus of Nazareth had been such a blasphemous threat to the Jews and such a political threat to the Romans that these two groups had conspired together to kill him. The whole point was to snuff out Jesus and his embryonic movement. So the last thing they wanted was Jesus' disciples persuading people that he'd risen from the dead. If they'd had the body, then as the first Christians started touring Jerusalem, punching the air, saying, Christ is risen, Jesus is alive, the Jews or the Romans would have put Jesus' dead body in a cart and wheeled it behind the disciples and said, no, he's not alive. He's dead. Look, here's his dead body. Come and look for yourselves. Jesus was, after all, a celebrity. You see, strictly speaking, Christianity should not exist. It should never have gone off the ground. The so-called resurrection appearances, they should have been instantly disproved by both the Romans and the Jews who had the dead body of Jesus in a sealed tomb, which according to the Gospels was guarded by soldiers. But neither the Jews nor the Romans ever did produce the body. That's because they themselves could see that the tomb was empty. So the Jews and the Romans, they would have produced the body if they'd had it. The reason they didn't was because Jesus had gone missing. The best they could do to explain the empty tomb at the time was to make up a story that Jesus' disciples had stolen his body, which, if nothing else, shows they didn't have his body. Minimal fact number 3. Jesus' disciples believed that he rose and that he had appeared to them. Now, hang on, what about these resurrection appearances? I mean, aren't they really just legends which, kind of grew up over time? I mean, after all, wasn't it hundreds of years later that these resurrection stories eventually got written down? Well, we now know that that is not the case. All the gospel reports of the resurrection were written within the lifetimes of the original eyewitnesses. And our earliest record of the resurrection appearances can be traced back to within a few months of the resurrection. There is wide agreement amongst scholars from all kinds of different backgrounds that this list of resurrection appearances can be dated as early as 35 AD. As early as 35 AD, this list was well established. The resurrection appearances, therefore, are as old as Christianity itself, and they're definitely not a much later legendary development. So we have got a very early report of Jesus' resurrection reproduced within this letter, which is now known as 1 Corinthians. Question, what if the resurrection appearances were really hallucinations? I mean, people who hallucinate, they want to see something so badly, they end up thinking that they are seeing it. I mean, sometimes imaginary things seem real. Maybe the disciples imagined the resurrection. Well, psychologists study hallucinations. Let's just be clear, for this idea to work, we'd have to say that all 550 or so people who saw the resurrected Jesus on 11 different occasions over a period of 6 weeks were all hallucinating the same thing. That all the groups who had meals with him, that all those who said they touched him, that all those who said they had long conversations were all hallucinating. Now, here is the problem. Psychologists tell us there is no such thing as a group hallucination. We don't know of any group hallucinations. Only one person can see a specific hallucination at any one time. But there is another alternative. Hey, maybe the disciples just lied. I mean, what if the disciples did steal Jesus' body and then they began a rumor that Jesus had risen from the dead? If so, we would be talking about the world's most successful deception. Now, let's just imagine for a moment the disciples did steal the body. The biggest problem with this argument is that the disciples didn't just say Jesus is alive. They actually died for it. Wait, that's not a problem at all. Loads of people die for their beliefs. Yes, people die for what they believe in. People tend not to die for lies that they know are lies because they made up the lie themselves. These disciples were in a unique position. They were martyred for their belief in the resurrection. If they had stolen the body and somehow hoaxed the resurrection appearances, would they have allowed themselves to be tortured to death for what they knew was a lie? You see, the disciples were literally crucified for their belief in the resurrection. Right up until the last minute, they could have escaped death simply by admitting they'd stolen Jesus' body. If the resurrection was a scam that they'd invented, don't you think at least one of them would have cracked and said, I give up. You're right. Yeah, it was a lie. We stole the body. The resurrection is just a lie we made up. Yeah. For goodness sake, cut me down, please, from the cross so I can get on with the rest of my life. But none of them ever said that. So, our third minimal fact, which is accepted even by skeptics, even by opponents of Christianity, is that the disciples were not deliberately lying. They genuinely believed that Jesus rose and that he had appeared to them. Okay, we've looked at 3 minimal facts. Let's imagine our initial goal is that we want to undermine, or we want to at least discredit the resurrection. We need to come up with something, an alternative theory. Any attempt to explain away these facts can't leave one of them out. Hey, the reason why I became convinced that Jesus must have risen from the dead is because the resurrection explanation of these facts outdistances all the other competing hypotheses by such a large margin. The resurrection is the only explanatory theory that can accommodate all the known facts. Maybe the band would like to come and join me. And as they do, let's imagine we say the resurrection never happened. Well, that's fair enough. I used to be a skeptic myself. We would still have to come up with something to account for the explosive arrival of Christianity. Christianity exploded into life with thousands of Jews in Judea suddenly worshipping a man. But no historian would ever have predicted this because first century Jews were strict monotheists. The last thing that they wanted to do in this life was to worship a human being. They thought that was an appalling idea. They thought that was idolatry. So why did thousands of Jews suddenly commit idolatry? By worshiping a carpenter as God. Hey, if two people walked in to Jesus' tomb, they would either both have seen that there was a dead body in the tomb, or they would both have seen that the tomb was empty. There's no way that as they left, one of them would have turned to the other and said, well, you know what? It may have been empty for you, but it wasn't empty for me. No. We're talking about a physical, tangible body here. I'm afraid that history is terribly brutal to relativism. The resurrection is not just true for Christians. It's either true for everyone because it actually happened, or it isn't true for anyone because it didn't happen. This morning, Jesus comes to each of us with this invitation. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live even if they die.
Hey guys, before you go, we just want to say a massive thank you for watching this video today. My name's Chris. I'm part of the leadership team here at the Beacon Church. You know, as a church, we have a big vision. We believe that we exist to help people to know God, to find freedom, to discover their purpose, and to make a difference. If this video has made a difference in your life today, then make sure you check out our other content in our playlist. We believe it's going to really help you out. And don't forget to like and subscribe as you go. Well, that's all from me today. Take care. God bless.